Right, are we live? Looks like we might be live. All right, there we go. Okay, we were having some technical difficulties there for a quick moment. Right. Sorry about that. Gotta love some technical issues. Okay. All right. I hope everyone's having a good Monday. Okay. Let me just double check one thing on my side over here. Okay, I think we're good to go. So, what I wanted to chat about today was this question that I think a lot of us have out there, which is, what do we do when we are having some questions about the eligibilities of autism or emotional disturbance? What happens when we are looking at both of them? There are some overlaps between these two different areas of eligibility in regards to some of the eligibility components. And we definitely have some pretty complex students that we are working with that may be presenting in one way that some part of your team feels like they may be due to some autistic-like behaviors, and other people on your team are thinking it might be more due to emotional concerns. So how do we figure this out in regards to which one should we be talking about? Which one should be primary? Should we be saying yes to both of them? So when we're thinking about this question, we're having that complexity. And again, sometimes it's because different team members kind of view the student a little bit differently. Sometimes it's just a really complex student. So one of the things that I like to think about is the fact that we do have some overlapping symptoms between them. So when I think about when we look at the autism classification, our students on the autism spectrum definitely struggle with relationships, right? A lot of peer relationship difficulties. When we look at our definition of emotional disturbance, it talks about difficulties building and maintaining relationships with peers and adults, right? Or peers and teachers. So right there, we have some overlap right there. And one of the questions can really be like, all right, if I have a kid who's struggling with socialization, is it because of this? Or is it because of this, right? What are some other things that can happen sometimes too with some of the similar symptoms? Some of our students on the autism spectrum have some interesting behaviors, right? And when we look at emotional disturbance and we look at inappropriate behaviors under normal circumstances, it can kind of sound like some of our kids on the spectrum, right? Now, I'm really talking about this instance where either you yourself or other people on the team are really trying to distinguish between these two different eligibilities. There are definitely times that we are working with students and we can easily say this is autism. Maybe this is an eligibility from, before the age of 3. This is something we've consistently seen, and some of these behaviors may be just more attributed towards an autism diagnosis or an autism classification. And sometimes we may be looking at, these are some newer behaviors, right? A lot of times when we think about autism, we think about this, of course, as a developmental disability. Most of the time we are seeing these behaviors from very early on. We may not see that same type of thing with our kids that, fall under that emotional disturbance piece. So that's one thing to take a look at. And the other thing I really thought about here as I was kind of getting ready to have this conversation with all of you this evening was really needing to go beyond just what our rating scales are telling us, right? So we have our rating scales, and whether they're an autism rating scale, a broadband rating scale like the Basque or the Achenbach or something like this, a lot of different rating scales that we can take a look at. And I think it's always really important that we look at the information beyond just what the elevated T-score is telling us, right? Because the T-score is just saying there are concerns in this behavior, right? It's not telling us the why behind it. It's not telling us the historical perspective behind it. It's not telling us any of that information. So one of the things that I think can be really, really helpful, and I know most of you guys are doing this. I don't know about you. Right now, I've got a couple of reports that I would say I'm working on, but I think it would be better termed that I'm procrastinating, because that's really where I'm at right now. But we definitely have some reports that we're all working on where that educational history, that documentation of that historical perspective is really going to be helpful, not just for you, but for anyone else who's going to be reading this report. Right? Again, we talked about autism as, typically seen as a very developmental progression. And so a lot of times we're going to see some different behaviors along the way versus sometimes some of our students with more emotional difficulties. I'm not saying they don't also have a historical perspective, but they can sometimes all of a sudden kind of come up, not out of the blue, but, we may be seeing like all of a sudden we weren't noticing any emotional concerns until all of a sudden we hit middle school or we hit high school or something like that. So that documentation that everyone is doing in that educational history is going to be so important for everybody, right? Again, not just for you, but for the reader, right? So whether that reader is the parent, whether that reader is someone's attorney or advocate, always want to make sure whoever's picking up kind of gets that same understanding that you got with all of that wonderful information that you took a look at. So I have to tell you, just today, I was doing that CUME search, right? I was looking through, I think the CUME was like this thick. I was going through every single piece of paper, just to see what was going on, what was that educational history like. It can take a long time. It can definitely take a long time, but it can be really important for that documentation, right? And for that next reader of that report there. So educational history and documenting that historical perspective, I think is going to be really, really important. One of the other things, though, that I think can be really important for any of these cases that sometimes also takes some time is some really good interviewing. So what do I mean by that? We have a lot of people fill out rating scales. We have a lot of people fill out input forms. We have a lot of people who are filling out health and development questionnaires. We have a lot of words written down. But I think sometimes it's really impressive how much more information we get when we have a conversation with someone, right? So let me bring up always my favorite example. And I saw this today on a report that I was taking a look at, and that is the BASC. One of my favorite rating scales. And that atypicality scale, right? Atypicality on the BASC can mean a lot of different things. I can definitely see that elevated for some of my kids that are emotionally disturbed. I can see that being elevated for some of my kids on the spectrum. But sometimes we have parents or teachers who are marking items and we're like, what did you mean by that? Right? Like, what do you mean seems out of touch with reality? That's a pretty wide statement there, right? And so does that mean like they just kind of like, I'm concerned about some sort of like psychosis or schizophrenia? Is it meaning that they have a different idea about relationships than all the other kids do? Is it sometimes, what's another good one under atypicality? Sometimes they say things that don't make sense. Yeah, sometimes my kids with severe articulation problems, I'll have my teachers who are marking that, and all of a sudden it's elevating atypicality, and what they meant was, I have no idea what they're saying, right? But it all just kind of looks the same, but could have a variety of different underlying things around that. So I think one of the important things to do, especially in those kind of situations, is to get on the phone, get onto Zoom, somehow follow up and say, could you give me an example of that? What did you mean by that? Right? So we get that understanding, because all of a sudden if a teacher is talking about something that we're like, the kid is still talking to imaginary friends and they're in middle school, that means something very different than them just saying, sometimes they think very differently about how admin should be teaching. I'm not teaching, but how admin should be reacting to some of their behaviors. It just seems like it's a little out of touch with reality. Very different things. Very different things. I almost wish that depending on some of those items that, people click on, especially for those online ones, I almost wish there was like this little pop-up window that just showed up that said like, give me an example of that. right? Because there's certain ones that seem really obvious to understand. There's other ones that could have so many different explanations of that. So if you are having one of those cases where you have a super complex kid and you're like, I don't know, I'm seeing all these elevations, this person's saying this person's saying this, pick up the phone, get onto Zoom, ask some questions about, when did you start noticing this behavior, right? What does this behavior look like in your setting? When do you see this behavior? When do you not see this behavior, right? Almost makes me think of like in an FBA kind of situation about like when we see this, when we don't see this. Because I think sometimes having that understanding about what are some of those antecedents, what are some of those situations that maybe could cause some of these behaviors, and what do we see about consequences too? What happens when a behavior occurs and the teacher responds in this way? What do we notice with the student, right? A lot of these different things can be really helpful. I know it is the beginning of May when I'm talking to you guys all right now. And it's really hard. Many of you guys just have weeks left. You guys are on your countdown to the end of the school year and you're like, I'm just trying to get all of these different reports in. However, for your super complex cases, I would definitely figure out how you're going to get a hold of these teachers, how you're going to get a hold of these parents so that we can ask these follow-up questions to really help us delineate, is this one or the other, or in some situations, is it both, right? So we definitely have some kids that are on the autism spectrum that also have some significant emotional concerns, right? Different districts kind of deal with that in different kind of ways, but you know, we definitely know there's an increase in anxiety and depression with a lot of our kids on the spectrum, and that was even before COVID. And so some things that we want to, you know, take a look at in regards to, are we seeing an increased level of anxiety than maybe we've been seeing in the past, right? Some different things to be thinking about there. Okay, want to share with you guys, and I'm sorry if you can't read it too well on my screen here, but for those of you who've been part of my membership NSP Insiders, you guys probably are really familiar with the fact that I have put together these different documents for all the different areas of eligibility. And you guys, if you go to this website, just my website, jennyponzerk.com/live, you're going to see there's a couple of different freebies there. And one of the freebies that is there is what I'm referring to as my eligibility documents. And it's just a compilation of all the different eligibility areas and just a couple of quick kind of reference pages in regards to things to think about and things to consider as you are examining these different areas of eligibility. So if that's something that you're interested in doing and taking a look at, absolutely free, go ahead and go to jennyponzerk.com/live. You're going to see some other freebies there too. So if any of those other ones seem interesting to you, feel free to go ahead and, you know, click on those and get access to those as well. You can also get access to any of my previous Facebook Lives. I think this is number 3. See, still having technical issues too for any of you who joined me a little bit late. We're still working on this. We're still working through this. Now, one of the other reasons why I'm talking about this emotional disturbance and autism kind of conundrum that we have sometimes is it can be a difficult kind of conversation in your own head. It can be an interesting thing as you're presenting it to the team. And one of the sessions that we're going to be providing this summer during my summer boot camp is actually a deep dive into this exact conversation. So a good focused attention on emotional disturbance and autism. And I have to tell you, when I was talking with some of the different people who are going to do presentations for me, including my person who's going to come and talk about this, I really wanted for people to have, I think it's going to be about a 2.5 hour training. And I really want it to be a deep dive, right? I don't want it to just be, you know, some of us have gone to those trainings where like the first 2 hours of it is just all that background information that we already know, right? Or I could already look up an ed code. What I want us to do is really get into the nitty gritty here. And that's one of the things that I shared with the presenter who are doing all of my different deep dives. So this is definitely one that we've confirmed. If you want to look up some information about summer boot camp, we have a little bit of information on our website. You can go to jennyponzurek.com, just scroll on down a little bit and it'll link you directly to our summer boot camp page. But what I will tell you is that our registration is going to open next week. So you can put it on your calendar to go ahead and take a look at it. We'll have all the information about the different other deep dive topics that we're going to have available as well as a little bit more information if you are a new hire, if you're going into your internship next year, and all of the different kind of session topics that we're going to have for you, as well as some information for what I refer to as my newer school psychs out there. You guys are like finishing up that first year, second year, third year, kind of still in that middle ground there, and you're just kind of trying to figure out, am I doing this right? Right. So we're going to have some sessions for you guys too. So if you go there now, you can make sure to get on the wait list so that on the moment registration opens that you get an email all about that. And if you sign up in the very first week, we have a special bonus for everyone who signs up then. And you get access to a video series that I created with a colleague of mine that really focuses on time optimization. If you are interested in some other resources about time, make sure you go to that website. Let me just go ahead and bring it back up, the jennyponzurek.com/live. There's also some time management tips that are on there, as well as these eligibility documents. All right. So I'm really excited. I hope you guys are able to come to that deep dive. If you have questions, like I have questions, about what are some other things to be considering when we have some of these different students that we are working with, come on down. Make sure you take a look at the information on our summer boot camp page. And again, registration is going to open up next week. So I hope to see you guys all there. All right, I'm just going to double check and see if there are any questions in the chat. All right, I don't see anything in there right now. So I'll just say thank you to everyone who came out and hung out with me. Again, sorry for those tech issues at the very beginning. And I will see you guys all soon. Bye, everyone.